You can't get rid of me. Creepy. Terrifying. Ding dong, ding dong. I'm not obsessed with her. She's obsessed with me. A couple weeks ago, we watched Fiona Harvey's interview on Piers Morgan, where she went on and said,
I just generally think he's got extreme psychiatric problems.
I mean, there's no doubt he...
Oh my God, I'm getting flashbacks. She denied that, like, he was ever abused or assaulted. She said that this wasn't her, da-da-da-da-da. And like, really? Do we believe Fiona Harvey? She said none of this happened. Well, somebody else who claims that Fiona Harvey was stalking her before Fiona started stalking Richard Gadd has also come out on Piers Morgan to talk about her experience. So this is Fiona Harvey's first alleged victim.
I'm extremely concerned that this woman might also be moving close to where I live.
Do you feel threatened by that?
I always felt threatened. I just never knew what she was capable of. She was rude to staff. She shouted at people. She was inappropriate with a male. She threw a book across the office and hit somebody with it. She tried to follow a male member of staff home. I was horrified. She just went completely crazy and started screaming at me. Very similar to the scene in episode 1 in Richard Gadd's show.
Oh man,
Every day I'd come into the office, the answer phone would be full of messages, all from her. I had grown adults in tears, terrified that she was going to harm them. That was the point at which I thought, I can take no more of this.
Do you have any doubt that she is a dangerous stalker? When Richard Gadd's character in Baby Reindeer goes looking for evidence about his stalker Martha, he quickly finds news reports with chilling echoes of his own experiences.
You know, this was the part in the show that I was mostly curious about, whether she had stalked somebody else prior, because this was a pretty big moment in the show. So to have the actual person come out on Piers Morgan is crazy.
As with Fiona Harvey herself, it didn't take long for the real identity of the person at the heart of that story to become widespread public knowledge. Her name is Laura Ray, and as the apparently fictional headline suggests, she is a lawyer who claims that Fiona Harvey stalked and harassed her and her family many years before she ever met Gadd. I put those claims to Fiona Harvey during our interview. The Sun reported an interview with Laura Ray, who you've referenced, who accused you of inappropriate behaviour whilst you worked with her.
She headhunted me from another firm because she needed someone to do employment law, and I'm pretty good at employment law, so...
She said that she had to sack you days later because you were completely incapable of behaving yourself.
I walked. Her staff were really, really rude to me.
She then said that following you leaving, obviously very quickly, that you then harassed her. Mrs. Ray said she was so frightened she issued workers at her firm with personal alarms. You were then served an interim interdict to stop you from contacting the lawyer or her politician husband.
Yeah, that's nonsense.
An interim
we have checked this out. There is no interim interdict.
God, her little playbook is so annoying. Actually, she wanted me. Actually, I left. Well, actually, that's a lie. She just has like a playbook. And you know what's so scary about this? Imagine you're telling people what happened to you and the other person just completely denies it and says that you made it all up and you're a liar. And like, it makes me like freeze just thinking about it, because how do you respond to that? Like, they're just not living in reality. Dealing with people that are delusional is one of the most stressful things in the entire world.
Well, after that interview, which has now been seen by nearly 14 million people on the Uncensored YouTube channel alone, Laura Ray contacted me and said she'd like her opportunity to respond. And she joins me now in the studio. Laura, thank you very much for coming down from Scotland for this.
I gotta say, it is a really big and, not to be corny, but quite frankly, beautiful move for her to come on and talk about this, because it's basically saying, fuck you, Fiona, you're not gonna scare me anymore. Because a lot of times when people deal with stalkers and the stalker eventually unattaches from them, they're like, I don't want to resurface that in any way. I don't want to re-engage with that. I got out clean. I just want to get away. But like, this lady came on and said, actually, bitch, let's go. And this time, you're not gonna have power over me. And whatever you do, I'm not afraid of it.
Because of the Netflix series and how incredibly successful it's been, one of the most watched series in living memory, it's brought it all back to your door and your family and what you say you went through at the hands of Fiona Harvey. So first of all, when did you know Netflix were doing a series?
Well, I found out about 5 weeks ago. The Mail on Sunday contacted me and asked me had I seen Baby Reindeer, and I had no idea what they were talking about. So they suggested I go and watch an episode of it, which I did, and then I spoke to them, and I couldn't believe it. From the very beginning, it was obvious it was the same woman. It was Fiona Harvey.
Oh my God, there's something so creepy but so vindicating about that. Like, imagine somebody manipulated you, harassed you, stalked you, tormented you for many, many years, and then you unhook from that relationship or situation or whatever. But then years later, you find out that they did it to somebody else, and that person put them on fucking blast. Just blasted them out of the ocean with a Netflix documentary on how crazy they were. Dude, I would be partying, bro.
The actress, who does a very good job, sounds like her, looks like her, mimicked her to a T.
And uses the same phrases which they found on the real Fiona Harvey's Twitter account.
Yes, I mean, I have a file full of papers which are letters from her, emails, faxes and so forth. And it's all identical.
And you yourself were identified very quickly from the series because there could only have been one Scottish lawyer who'd been through this experience with Fiona Harvey because it was all documented.
Well, I think it's because it was so unusual that she was a female stalker stalking another female. And so I was actually identified by the press before she was. I think the press sort of held back a bit with her for about a week. And then I think it was the Sun who came out and said who she was.
That is actually so interesting. She's right. I don't hear of that very often, like a female stalker stalking another woman. Like, I'm so curious, like what there's some kind of trigger that happens with Fiona Harvey where she attaches to somebody, and I'm just so curious what that is.
MP wife and the stalker, your husband Jimmy was an MP at the time.
Yeah.
And it was a front page splash story. So this wasn't a quiet, small thing. This was a massive news story in Scotland that people would have been aware of.
It was indeed, yes.
So when you realised that your story was being recounted, albeit with the names changed, in Baby Reindeer, how did it make you feel?
Well, I just couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe what was going on, and I was in a state of shock for about a week.
Really?
Yeah.
It had a really bad effect on you.
It had a very bad effect on me, and even now, after 5 weeks or so, when I'm getting over it a bit, it's still very triggering every time I see something. I mean, I've never watched YouTube before, apart from when I saw your programme a few weeks ago. And yet every day there are more comments and people, psychiatrists and so on, going on, talking about the show, analysing your interview. And it just all triggers everything back to me every time I see it. It's very, very distressing.
Have you been emotional about this?
I have, yes.
You've been left to tears from it?
Well, yes. I mean, I'm a reasonably robust person. I'm an advocate. I appear in court all the time, so I'm not easily prone to tears, but this has got me very, very anxious and upset.
Wow. Strange question. Does this woman seem very credible to you guys or not so much? For me, I don't know what it is about her demeanor, but she feels so credible to me. Whereas the minute that Fiona Harvey started talking, I was like, I don't believe a word out of this lady's fucking mouth. I don't know exactly how to explain it or what the traits are. It doesn't seem like she's saying all of this for attention in any capacity or to try to manipulate people or to convince people. It feels like she's just saying it and finally letting out answers that have been in her head for a long time. And there's a certain type of delivery that comes with that feels believable.
And particularly since a few weeks ago, I thought she was down in London, but a few weeks ago, we were told that in the little village near us called Bucklivy, which is where she's from originally, she's now been looking to buy a house, we've been told. Now, I don't know whether that's true, but apparently journalists were going round the doors in Bucklivy about 2 weeks ago asking about this. So I'm extremely concerned that this woman not only is abusing me on the internet, on her Facebook pages, and on every opportunity she can, defaming me, but she might also be moving close to where I live.
I saw a couple people in chat saying that that there are women dealing with female stalkers. Do you guys feel like female stalkers attach to other women because they're envious of them in some capacity? Like, I feel like this woman she's very pretty, she's very credible. She, what do they say, that she runs her company or she had a good job or something? That's something that I could see intimidating Fiona, because she does not have it all together. She claims to be an attorney, but who the fuck has she worked for before, Like, admiration that becomes envy. Yes, that is so creepy. That is really creepy. Wait, have you guys ever been friends with like a girl before that you swear to God does not fucking like you, but they'll like sing your praises, but it just, for some reason, it doesn't feel real? It is the creepiest feeling in the world, because I'm like, bitch, why are you here? Like, you don't even like me. Do you know that you don't like me? Do you know? Because I know. I don't know. I'm like, I guess I'll just keep my head down and keep going this way. Dude, it is disturbing, because I personally, I would never do that. If I don't like you, I won't talk to you. Like, oh my God, that's so weird. Are you guys that way too? If you don't like somebody, you're not going to interact with them, right?
Let's go back to when you first encountered her.
Yeah.
Obviously, she says that you headhunted her to be a specialist in the employment law at your firm at the time. Is that true?
No. She was looking for a traineeship. She had been looking for a traineeship for about 4 years and couldn't get anyone to take her on.
Because she wasn't good at her job. And then this woman was good at her job and nice. And so Fiona probably attached.
I think she'd been taken on twice before me, but for very brief periods of time. So you're supposed to get a traineeship within 2 years of getting your legal diploma. She must have got several extensions on that because she was way out of time. So I received quite a number of letters from her, and they were in such familiar terms that I thought this must be somebody I've met somewhere, perhaps through the Labour Party. So then when I got engaged to Jimmy, she sent me a congratulations card. So I then got another letter from her saying, "Oh, I'm disappointed you haven't interviewed me for a traineeship." And I felt rather bad about that if this was somebody that I'd met and perhaps overlooked. So I invited her to come in and see me, to talk to me. And I have to say, she was reasonably credible. I'm not daft, she didn't behave in the way she subsequently behaved, during the interview. But I did have a few concerns about her. She went into a bit of detail with me about her family circumstances, which I won't repeat. But she made me feel very sorry for her.
Wow, that is so courteous of her. Although Fiona Harvey allegedly has stalked and harassed her and her family for years, she still won't trash her and, put out her private family details that she told her in confidence. That's what type of person she is.
She said, "I've never had anybody give me a chance.
So classy.
Would you please help me out here? I've got no money, etc." So I said, okay. And she only worked for me for 2 weeks.
Did you believe that she was qualified?
Oh no, I knew she wasn't qualified. She was looking for a traineeship. Trainees do menial jobs like, at the start filing or, sitting in and things. You're training them. They're not doing anything of any great worth for you. So you need to have a 2-year training.
But she said she had a law degree.
Yeah, but that's not enough.
No, it's not full legal training. But do you think that she even had the law degree?
I think she had the law degree because in my file of papers, I do have a copy of something from the Law Society where it does state that she's got a law degree. So I believe she has a law degree. And I believe that some years later, she got the diploma in law, which you require to have in Scotland.
Okay, dude, oh my God. I'm going to say something crazy right now. I'm going to say something absolutely crazy. Now, I need you guys to know this is coming from a person that's been to a lot of therapy, okay? And this is going to be a very, very brash statement. If you grew up in a home with really bad family dynamics, maybe you didn't get a lot of socialization, maybe love wasn't properly demonstrated to you, maybe you didn't have any siblings, or you were thrown into abusive environments or something like that. And if that was the first 10 or 15 years of your life, you may not have the same societal norms as like other people. And that is the perfect trigger to go to therapy and understand that the circumstances that you grew up in were not normal. Because otherwise what's going to happen, and this is so not your fucking fault, okay? I say this like I'm talking to a younger version of myself too. You're going to get into society at like 20 years old, or you're going to get into relationships or the workforce, and things that make sense to you because it works in your world are not going to make sense to other people because the roadmap that you were given is like fucked up, okay? And then what's going to happen is people are going to treat you badly, or you're going to be in bad relationships. You're going to be like, why is this happening? And it's because your roadmap is fucked up. And once again, it's not your fault. But if you look back like in your past and you say, oh, you know, I was neglected when I was a kid, or I wasn't, you know, properly demonstrated a good relationship between my parents, or, you know, my sibling was fucking slapping me or something like that. That shit is not normal, and you might need somebody to help you comb through all the bad stuff that happened to you, because otherwise you're gonna like go through society with trauma brain and like do weird shit to people, and then you're not gonna understand why bad stuff keeps happening to you. So once again, I know that's so brash, but it's not your fault. But if you feel like bad stuff happened to you, you should like talk to somebody about it, because bro, that's what fucking happened to me like through my 20s. Like my roadmap was all fucked up, and I was like, why is this always happening to me? And I got a lot of help, and not only do I feel so much better, a lot of things that didn't make sense to me when I was younger make a lot of sense right now. So anyways, Fiona needed some fucking help.
And I believe that some years later she got the diploma in law, which you require to have in Scotland.
Do you think she ever practiced law?
No, I don't think so. I mean, she certainly, I don't think she ever got a traineeship in Scotland. She, I know for sure, worked with another firm after myself and was fired from there, and caused that firm a lot of grief.
You claimed in our interview that you didn't even know the name of your own firm.
Well, that's nonsense. I mean, my firm was called L&L Lawrence at the time I employed her. We subsequently amalgamated with a much larger firm called Drummond Miller, who took over ourselves and another trade union firm called McPhail's. So to keep the connection with the firms and to keep the goodwill, they called us the McPhail-Lawrence Partnership in Glasgow. And then a few years later, we were all subsumed into Drummond Miller.
Once she started working for you, what happened?
Okay, that's a good question. For my ADHD people, see, I'm tuning you back in. Also, if you're new here, follow the channel. And I try to keep you focused if you have a short attention span. So Piers just asked, she started working for you. What happened? Like, what was the reason that she was like, uh-oh, this isn't going to work?
Well, I was out of the office quite a lot because we had an office in Glasgow, an office in Edinburgh. So she was put onto a desk where what she had to do was jot down details of anyone phoning on our accident hotline. Now, this was the days before the internet. So we had a special phone number, a free phone number. Members of the public could phone if they wanted advice about an accident. So all she had to do was to write down the name and address of the people, take some basic details, and then get a solicitor to phone them. She wouldn't have been capable of, you know, giving advice because she had no experience.
Right.
She'd never done anything.
So it was a clerk job, really? She was doing.
Yeah, pretty much.
So she was basically working a desk job. Her job was to answer phones. That's it.
A trainee solicitor's not quite a clerk, but I mean, they're a very junior member of your staff.
I meant kind of office clerk.
Okay, I'm so sorry. How unstable do you have to be to have your entire degree get to like your third possible job and like they cannot trust you to answer the phones? Bro, wait, one in the chat if you think you can handle manning the phones of a law office that's not very busy. Like, give me a 1. Also, you can be a 2, okay? You can be a 2. I'm a pretty strong 1 here. I could do this in my sleep. Okay, we got a couple 2s. Also, okay, you know what? The people that have phone anxiety, I forgot that. You guys don't count, okay? I feel like Fiona was picking up this phone confidently. She probably loves talking on the phone. Y'all know that. She left, 5,000 voicemails? Okay, that wouldn't be y'all. She was probably picking up this phone and cussing people out. Let's be for real. Let's be honest.
She was very much trainee solicitor role. So, you know, she was there to learn from us rather than the other way round.
And how did she do?
She was dreadful. I mean, I wasn't there all the time, but essentially she was rude to staff. She shouted at people. She was inappropriate with a male member of staff. She tried to follow a male member of staff home. I mean, all sorts of things happened. She threw a book across the office and hit somebody with it. But on the hotline, she was heard to be saying to people, oh, you don't want to come here. I'll give you the name of another firm of solicitors. So we were paying all this money for this premium rated hotline, and she was giving the details of our competitors to individuals.
And did you try and have it out with her?
Oh, she hated them. She was a mole. She probably was having a bad day at the office, didn't like this lady, and then started giving out the competitors' numbers to customers. Yeah, that's crazy.
Well, I did. I mean, the first thing that had happened was on day one, she came into my cashier demanding that the cashier give her a sub. And our cashier, Caroline, said to her, I'm sorry, but we don't do that. You'll need to wait to the end of the month. A couple of days later, she came into my office, burst through the door, very upset and kind of angry. And I said, what is it? And she said, well, there's a man downstairs who won't leave. I owe him money. And I thought, goodness, somebody sitting in my reception, anybody else who's waiting there will think I owe this man money. So I said to her, well, what's this all about? And she said, well, I owe him for a car repair. And she said, so I need a sub. And I said, well, I'm disappointed you keep asking for subs because we've told you we're not going to do that. I said, how much is it? She said, £250. And she said she borrowed the money from her auntie, but when she went into the envelope, it wasn't enough money in it. And she said she had no money to live till the end of the month. So I said to her, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you £250 out of my own personal money. Go and pay the man and then come up and talk to me.
Oh my God,
so
she
came
loaned
up
her
and
money?
talked to me. I said, keep the other £230 to keep yourself going. I said, and you know, she then started to tell me about various financial problems she had, which I won't go into.
You know what? I've also noticed this too. If somebody is starting to develop an unhealthy obsession with you and they're jealous of you, if you're nice to them, it makes it worse. And I don't know why. It's like they get mad that you're kind on top of like having something else that you want. I've seen this happen before with my other friends too. And it's like when they're nice to these types of people, because I'm sorry, I don't keep these bitches around. If you don't like me, like we're done. All right. Well, I'll nip that in the bud real quick. But I've seen it happen where like my friends will continue to be nice to these types of girls and then they latch on further and they get mad about it. They do. I also feel like these people often switch between loving you and hating you. And so it's like this intense connection that's always love, hate, love, hate, love, hate, love, hate. And sometimes you don't even know when they're switching to hate or when they're switching to love. And that's why it's so intense to them. And they also get addicted to it too, because they're addicted to the highs and lows of loving you and hating you. And it's so scary when somebody gets attached to you like this. And then you don't have that same connection because you don't love, hate them. You're just like, yeah, I like this person. They're fine. And they're over there, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. Ding, ding, dong, ding, 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 dong. I think male stalkers are like that too.
I went down, I spoke to her bank about a week later, smoothed everything out for her. And when I came back to the office, she started saying to me, oh, I've been on the phone all afternoon to the Law Society to find out what will happen if I go bankrupt. And I said, well, Fiona, if you want to be a solicitor or ever be in a partnership, that's not the way to go. So anyway, I made a suggestion to her that she might want to sell the old car that she had, which had been the cause of the bill for the breakdown. And at that, she just went completely crazy and started screaming at me. Very similar to the scene in episode 1 in Richard Gadd's show.
What was she screaming?
Don't you speak to me like that. And she did the same thing with a couple of other members of staff. One of my conveyancing staff was trying to show her how to do some kind of clause in a conveyance. And she started shouting the same thing. I mean, don't you say that to me. Don't speak to me like that. But in a very loud and aggressive tone. So it became quite obvious quite quickly that she really wasn't cut out for this kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
She, I think one of the other things she did was she phoned up a disabled solicitor that we used to do Edinburgh agency work for. And she phoned him up and said to him, oh, I just want you to know that all the people here in this office, nobody likes you. Everybody says nasty things about you and makes comments about you.
And what was his disability?
He was, I think he'd had polio, so he couldn't walk properly.
Oh, God.
Oh She called a man with polio and said everyone doesn't like you. You have to be sick. You have to be unwell. Raise your hand if you're mentally ill, but you would just simply not do that, okay? Like, this goes beyond a diagnosis to me. This is just like a nasty f***ing person. That's so bad. I just can't imagine being the guy on the other end of receiving that call. That breaks my heart.
No, it was nasty stuff. She grabbed a phone from one of my members of staff who was on trying to explain something to a client who obviously was giving him some difficulty, and she then started shouting abuse down the phone at the client. So there was a whole number of these incidents, and I had spent a few days in London. I was on the executive of the Association of Personal Injury Lawyers, and I think it was one of their meetings I was at and doing other things in London, seeing clients. And I came back to the office this was at the end of the second week, so there'd been a few incidents I was aware of. But by the time I got back, there was more and more being reported to me. Staff members in tears because of the way she'd spoken to them. So I got her into the office and I said, look, this is not on. I put some of the stuff to her. I asked her about the phone line, and she said, no, I didn't do that. And then she says, oh, well, yes, I did, but I thought it was the right thing to do. So I just said, well, I don't think, you're cut out for here. So
oh my God.
I said to her, I'm afraid that's...
And it's so scary having to fire these people. Very, very scary.
That's it. I paid her for the month. She'd only been there 2 weeks and obviously had done nothing apart from cause complete havoc. And then she said, I'm not leaving. I'm going to phone the Law Society. I'm not leaving. And she then started shouting and screaming, running around the office. And eventually, my cashier and I, Carol Ann, had to get one arm on either side of her and actually march her out of the office.
Oh my God.
And she stood out there for at least half an hour screaming abuse. The answer phone would be full of messages, all from her, all threatening, nasty.
What kind of threats?
I'll get you. You're not going to get away with this. I'll get Jimmy Ray.
It's hard to imagine how she felt having to fire this woman, but have any of you guys ever had somebody like this in your life, like an ex or something like that you knew was going to lose her shit, and you knew you had to have the conversation where you're like, hey, this is like done. Like this is over here. It's anxiety inducing because people like this can be very unpredictable and you're not sure which way they're going to go. And then also there's the high lows of it. And then sometimes they'll try to do anything to provoke a reaction from you, which is like also very stressful, especially if they know you very well. And she knew this lady for 2 weeks.
But the way it was said was in a very threatening manner.
And how many was she leaving on a daily basis?
Well, the answer phone would be filled up.
How many was that, roughly?
I'm not sure how many messages, but she would rant on. It would take probably about an hour's worth of call.
Every day?
Every day. And then when we amalgamated with the other firms, again, she did the same thing. Not necessarily every day by that point. She blew a bit hot and cold, but it was pretty persistent for a couple of years. Also, years. She did this for nearly 5 years. So what she would do, given that way back in 1997, this was really at the start of the internet, so people weren't emailing to the same extent they do now. What she would do would be phone up other solicitors or send them faxes with defamatory stuff about me, saying how terrible I was, how terrible the firm was, accusing people of...
This was a woman that she knew for 2 weeks, and she was kind to. She gave her a job when she didn't have much experience. She loaned her money when she was in trouble. She was patient with her when she was doing bad things that she was not supposed to do on the job.
And then, I would get phone calls from people I didn't know who would say, I'm really embarrassed. I've had this fax through from this woman. I don't know her and I don't know you, but I thought I ought to bring it to your attention.
Wow.
So I had issued the staff with panic alarms, right back at the beginning when all this started. Because, I had grown adults in tears, terrified that she was going to harm them, terrified that something
she was going
to
come to the job or something.
She also claimed that you and your husband, Jimmy, who's sadly no longer with us, but he accused you of assaulting your 3-year-old son, Frankie, who was born with a rare chromosomal disorder.
Well, that was that was the point at which I thought I can take no more of this.
Oh my!
I had heard from a lawyer some months before that, who phoned me, who'd taken her on, and he said to me that he was in a terrible state because he'd fired her, and he went home that night to find 2 social workers at his door. The police were involved. It was all taken very seriously, and the accusation was that he'd been abusing his children. This went to the children's schools and so on. This man was on his knees and really upset. And I said, well, you know, all I could do is perhaps speak to the sort of things she's done to me. So when I was going to go to the bar in 2003, I had to do some exams the year before that. So I went to Strathclyde University. And who's the first person I see when I get to the university to start doing a couple of classes but her? And I couldn't believe it, because at that point it had gone a bit quiet. And there she was. And from then on, she followed me around the university. She would stand right up beside me and so on. So I complained to the professor at the university. And again, stalking wasn't really taken that seriously by people. I think people just assumed, oh, it's 2 women who just don't get on or something like that. So he said, oh, well, I've checked her records and she's not registered as a student here, so I've got no locus over her. And I said, well, if she's not registered as a student, can you not just throw her out, get security? And so I don't like to do that. Now, by the end of the university year, I got a letter to say that he apologised because she'd gone on to upset a number of members of staff, harass them and other students. So she knew that I'd made a complaint about them. So one day, just after I made the complaint, I go home to find 2 social workers at my door saying to me, you know, we have some very serious allegations. So I said to them, well, come in. And I said, before you say anything to me, I said, and I do understand you've got a job to do and it's a very important job. I said, but I want to tell you what I think is going on here. So I explained to them about the other lawyer. I explained to them everything, and they confirmed, oh yes, it's a woman who says that she's at university with you. Now, initially she gave
oh my God, she's telling people that she's affiliated with her while stalking and harassing her and accusing her of abusing her child. That's crazy. And like, I just can't get over the fact that she knew her for 2 weeks. Fiona Harvey, allegedly, has had so little attention in her life. She has been probably rampantly neglected for most of her life, that a 2-week relationship with this woman built that much of a connection to her. Another thing too is for victims of stalking, when somebody like this latches onto you so aggressively and you barely know them, you didn't do anything to invite them in, it's not an ex or it's something like that, it does something to your brain where you're like scared, like almost it feels like an irrational fear. It's very rational, but it feels like you're afraid of everything because you're like, how did this happen? How do I interact with human beings so this doesn't happen again? Are you going to be like this? 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 Because your brain is always trying to, you know, survive or protect you. So it needs to understand why certain things happen. And when she can't fully understand why Fiona did this, it puts like a fear in you of interacting or building relationships with anybody because you're like, are you going to do this to me? Because you just don't understand why it happened. Yeah, it's like a hypervigilance.
But to cut a long story short, she made 5 complaints to the social work department, eventually screaming at them down the phone, demanding that my severely disabled son be taken into care. Now, to my mind, that was the point at which I thought, no, enough is enough. I'm not having this. I'm not having this poor child beleaguered in that way. So I contacted the police. The police didn't do anything. But I was a consultant to Drummond Miller solicitors, and so they did the interim interdict for me.
So this is, again, a crucial part of this. And before we get to the interim interdict, I just want to ask you, she said to me she wasn't let go from your firm, but instead she walked.
Well, she was walked out the door, if I can put it that way.
But it certainly wasn't at her volition.
It wasn't at her volition.
Oh my God!
She said she never had any legal proceedings or restraining orders against her. But you say, and you provided documentary evidence of this, that there was an interim interdict against her. Now, just very simply explain what that is.
Well, in Scotland at the time, there was no procedure for harassment type cases. The only thing you could use was this procedure for interdict, which is when you want to try and get the court to stop someone from doing something that you fear they may do. So that's the purpose of an interdict. Now, because often the circumstances can be acute, you can apply for an interim interdict, which means there's an initial hearing before a judge who decides whether, on the basis of the information, it's appropriate to grant what is essentially a restraining order, an interim interdict. So that was granted.
And we've seen the documents to support that, both the claim and the fact that it was granted.
Yeah, so there is an initial writ that sets out all the circumstances on which you're asking the judge to find that, you know, there are grounds for concern here.
Right.
I never heard from her for 22 years, so the interim interdict did what, you know, I was hoping it would do.
And what was that feeling like when she disappeared?
It was relief, absolute relief. I mean, I had enough on my plate. Jimmy had a stroke about a year after all this. I was looking after Frankie, who's severely handicapped. Nobody knew at the time exactly what was wrong.
Do you think Jimmy's health was affected adversely by all the stress of this or not?
Jimmy was a pretty resilient guy, so no, I don't think so. I think he was more worried about me and about Frankie than he was about her harming him.
I mean, to have social workers turn up at your door with that kind of allegation when your son is already pretty disabled, it's hard to imagine many worse things for someone to do to someone.
Well, exactly. And I was horrified. I couldn't believe that anyone could be so callous and cruel. It's one thing having a go at me. I didn't mind that to the same extent. And, you know, she called me a lot of names. She's continuing to do so.
Yes, she is. And your letter to me when you contacted me was, unfortunately for me, I'm now collateral damage because Netflix allowed Miss Harvey to be so easily identifiable, which I think is inarguable. Have Netflix made any attempt to approach you?
Well, their solicitors spoke to me. They contacted somebody through the Mail on Sunday who then contacted me and asked me would I speak to their lawyers. So I had a conversation with them, and really what they wanted from me was a copy of the interim interdict.
And when was this?
About a week ago I spoke to them.
A week ago, but you hadn't heard from them before that?
I hadn't heard from them before that. Certainly nobody approached me to say there's going to be a story coming out in which it will be very obvious that you are one of the victims.
Do you think from that it would be correct to assume they may be panicking a bit, Netflix, about the fallout from all this?
Well, I really don't know. I can't speak.
I mean, it's very odd to me they've asked.
I don't think Netflix is panicking at all. It was a big series for them, and every video is just like more publicity. I don't think they're freaking out. The other thing that I think is probably really stressful for Laura is that, like, I think the human brain can only process but so much. Everything that she went through, for me, my brain would just like stop and say, we can recognize this timeline of events, but there is no way that this is ever going to make any sense, why this happened, why this is a piece of my life. We're just going to tap out. Like, personally, I think the human brain can only take but so much at once.
Well, I suppose they've got to show that what they have done is materially true or substantially true. I'm not
Was what they put in Baby Reindeer materially true about you?
Yes. Right. Well, in the sense that there was a character who was a mother, that there was nothing of that in mind. But the thrust of it, which was that she was sacked from a law firm and turned on her boss, that's true.
Yeah.
That somebody in it was a barrister, I'm now a barrister, so I think that's where that bit comes from. And the bit about the sick stalker targeting the deaf child is absolutely clearly a reference taken along with everything else.
No question. I mean, that's straight from this story.
Yeah.
Have you ever met Richard Gadd?
No.
Because I put this question to her about how unusual it is to have somebody stalking two completely different people, both of whom, by her estimation, are fantasizing. Let's take a look. Why would two people who have no contact with each other at all, Laura Ray...
Yo, the whiplash I just got from that nice, calm, credible, kind woman, then back to Fiona Harvey is like terrifying. Terrifying, but fascinating. Like, dude, watching Fiona Harvey is just a crazy thing to see in 4K. And you know who else? Mary Kay Letourneau. That was another one where I was like, holy fucking shit, I cannot believe that you're real.
Why would they both portray you as a Very unpleasant.
I don't know why Richard Gadd has, but Laura Walker, it was certainly because I was going for parliamentary selection.
The two different, you get my point, two different people.
Yeah, but Richard
Love how she's such a bad attorney that she can't even answer the phones in a training gig, but then she claims that Laura is jealous of her. What a fucking psycho.
Gadd has Googled that. Richard Gadd has used that as
Well, that's in the drama.
Show.
Is when they find out that you had previously harassed this family.
I haven't harassed that family.
When you saw that exchange, what went through your mind?
I was horrified. I mean, I've actually watched your interview a few times because the first time I saw it, I was in such shock watching her, seeing her, it just brought it all back again. And I've watched it several times to see what is it she's saying about me. And it's unbelievable that after the things she did, that she can say she wasn't harassing my family. Of course she was harassing my family.
For many years.
For many years. For longer than Richard Gadd.
When you've seen the fallout from the Netflix series plus my interview, particularly around the fact that she's adamant that she's never been in court, let alone admitted
Doesn't
to
matter.
stalking him or being convicted, and there is no apparent evidence she ever was convicted of any crime. What do you make of that? Because that goes right to the heart.
It doesn't matter. The police don't, and the courts, they don't do anything about stalking. So it just doesn't matter that she wasn't convicted of anything.
It's hard to say, really. I mean, I can't say whether she's got any convictions or not. I know that the newspapers have looked for them and can't find them. In Scotland, convictions can be spent after a certain number of years.
But it says that she was convicted, for example, for 4.5 years for what she did to you and your family.
Well, she wasn't convicted for that. I didn't press any kind of criminal charges.
So that is untrue.
So that's untrue.
I mean, again, back to Netflix's duty of care, they're making it very easy for both Fiona Harvey and you to be quickly identified.
Yeah.
And yet a material fact that she was sent to prison for 4.5 years for harassing you and your family, like it appears the same thing that Richard Gadd is saying about what happened to him, but neither of those things may be true.
Well, it doesn't appear they are true.
And you're a lawyer. It's quite a serious leap to go from somebody who may be harassing people, trolling, a nasty, abusive person, to a convicted criminal. Do you think?
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I don't think for the sort of thing she did to me, even if I had pressed for some kind of criminal conviction, I don't think she would have got very long, if any kind of custodial sentence.
True.
Would she now, do you think?
I think a lot of people have talked about this, but I think that stalking laws, which really don't exist, or the punishment for it, it is so ridiculous that people can't spend a proper amount of time in jail for this. And by a proper amount of time, I mean like 6 months minimum. Because it needs to be long enough where the person doesn't have any interaction with the victim and the connection, the fire dies from it, right? Because like I said, they're getting this love, hate, ding dong from it, right? Every time they do something, whether they get ignored or whether, you know, something activates them, they need to be in a jail cell, not just for 3 months, because they can, the delusion can keep going past 3 months. It needs to be like 6 months or a year or 2 years or something like that, because stalking is one of the most provable forms of harassment. If I can produce 500 pages of unwanted contact from somebody that also contains threats, you should go to jail. You should go away for some period of time. And it's so upsetting that so many people have so much proof of this from ex-partners, ex-employees, ex-acquaintances, and they're just like, sorry, can't do anything. And with the internet, it's just truly gotten so much worse.
Have the laws tightened on this?
I don't think so. I mean, I spoke to the police not so long ago and asked them about this, and certainly in Scotland, the law hasn't changed in line with the way it has in England on stalkers. So it's still very difficult. Basically, the police say unless she actually comes up and physically attacks me, there's nothing they can do to protect me.
And how does, given the fact that journalists have been investigating whether she might be moving back to your area or looking for someone to live there, how does that make you feel?
Frightened.
What do you think she might be capable of doing?
I don't know. I mean, I think one of the interesting things has been in all the press that has been about this, there's been a number of articles by psychiatrists who say that she probably has some kind of personality disorder. I don't know, I'm not a doctor. and that she may have some sort of delusional disorder. And that
Yes.
people with these kind of disorders actually believe everything they say. And that kind of, in a weird way makes sense to me, because she contradicted herself right, left and centre on your show. I have correspondence in which she contradicts herself, which she says doesn't exist. But I think she maybe genuinely does believe
Yes, I felt
in her own little parallel universe
I
that
felt
this is
that
true.
she was peddling lines that she may believe, which is delusional, but that may be the case. But I also think that she may have a very legitimate case against Netflix, Richard Gadd, Clerkenwell Films, if it turns out she's never been convicted of any crimes. Twice in that series, both in relation to you and Richard Gadd, she's getting lengthy prison sentences for the stalking, and that doesn't appear to be true.
Well, I agree with you, but I think what you then have to look at is what is that actually worth in terms of damages.
We're going into BOZE assumption land. You guys know, like when I do Sinister, I'm always trying to figure out like, what's the dot? Like what dots connect? I need this to make sense, right? I think from a very young age, Fiona Harvey was probably like rejected or abandoned by someone or everyone that like probably meant a lot to her, and she was extremely neglected, and her way of coping with that was being delusional and having fantasies about herself and having fantasies about people and the world around her. And that was like her coping mechanism for the rejection and the abandonment that she felt. And so then as an adult, she's a liar, she's extremely fucking delusional, and she gets overly attached to people quickly that make her feel something. There's some people that might actually relate to that like on a 10% scale, but she's at like the 100% scale, just like full blown fucking delulu. There's a difference between, like fantasizing about a book character or a movie character that's going to sweep you away and save all of your problems, and delusionally fantasizing about yourself, your own power, other people, all of that shit. And I think that was her coping mechanism. And it just, it's not working anymore.
Well, I agree with you, but I think what you then have to look at is what is that actually worth in terms of damages. So you have to prove that your reputation has been damaged. As far as I understand it, I'm not aware that Fiona has ever held down a job anywhere. So I don't think there's any claim for loss of earnings.
But she has got top lawyers now, both here and in the US, going after Netflix quite hard.
Well,
I think she has got a good case.
Well, I'm sure she may have a good case, but the question is then, certainly in Scotland, what would it be worth? You're looking at somebody who has a pattern of stalking, who stalked quite a number of people apart from myself. People have been coming out of the woodwork to me, frightened to come forward, but letting me know that they know what's going on.
I also wonder if stalking does have some kind of connection with like attachment issues or abandonment, because it's like taking power back in a "you're not going to leave me" kind of way. Like, you're not going to leave me, I'm not going anywhere, you can't get rid of me, we're still connected. I wonder, like we would have to look at a whole bunch more like instances of stalking, but I just curious.
Do you have any doubt that she is a dangerous stalker?
I have no doubt she's a dangerous stalker, no doubt whatsoever.
What has this being raked up done to you?
Well, it's made me very anxious. Certainly, it's every so often. I mean, every day I can't stop thinking about it, and I can't stop obsessively watching YouTube and all these different channels where people are exploring the ins and outs of it.
Because you didn't want to do an interview like this. You wanted this all just to, as it had been for a long time, just be part of the past.
Yeah.
But you felt compelled to because everyone was talking about you.
Well, I'm an advocate, I've got a reputation to defend, and the sting of what she says about me is basically that I'm a liar and that I'm an incompetent lawyer. So that's not good news. If
She's
you're an
projecting.
advocate.
She's a liar and she's an incompetent lawyer. She's not even a lawyer. Can you imagine if Fiona Harvey was your attorney? You may as well just get in the jail cell. Fiona Harvey could be Sarah Boone's 8th attorney. Like, truly. Nobody's picking that lady. Get in the cell.
And I certainly wouldn't want any of my clients, my solicitors who instruct me, or any clients that I represent to think any of that is true.
Have you considered suing her?
Well, I am considering suing her, and certainly if Netflix give her £11 million, I'll be suing her. The problem is that if she has no money, reparation claims are very expensive to mount. There is very little point in me suing her if she's got nothing.
Has Richard Gadd made any attempt to reach out to you at all?
None at all.
Would you have expected him to?
Well,
I mean, without him putting all this onto first an Edinburgh show and then a smash hit Netflix series, it would never have come to this.
well, I don't know what I would expect. I've never met him, and I can understand that, you know, he has written what I think is a very compelling TV series. He's done very well out of it, and I sort of wish him well on that. I do think that when he says that he changed all the details so that people wouldn't recognise her and she wouldn't recognise herself, that is just untrue. I mean, he could easily have made her somebody who didn't look like Fiona Harvey, who was, say, an accountant
It's
or a
changed
doctor.
the story completely. I mean, one of the Netflix chief executives, he's the Netflix policy chief. He went into the UK Parliament several weeks ago and he said this.
Baby Reindeer is an extraordinary story, and it is obviously a true story of the horrific abuse that the writer and protagonist Richard Gadd suffered at the hands of a convicted stalker. We did take every reasonable precaution in disguising the real-life identities of the people involved in that story.
Your response to that?
Well, I disagree completely with what he says. That's just not the case.
Do you feel better for doing an interview about this?
I do. I have to say it has made me feel much better because I feel I've got my point of view across and I can now just try and
taking your power back a little
and ignore it.
Have you been getting an adverse reaction from people?
Well, my colleagues and friends obviously not, and my colleagues at the bar have been very supportive. But certainly online I've had, you know, adverse comments. There is now a Fiona Harvey support group who are commenting.
There is nothing more stressful than people supporting a blatant abuser. Who supports abusers? Abusers! They do. People that are like, oh, well, I'm just like Fiona. Like, they realize they're exactly like her, so they defend her. I can't believe that. Oh my God, that's crazy. Abuser gathering. Everyone come one, come all. It's on Facebook.
Who are commenting that I look like a man and that I am Richard Gadd's trans girlfriend, or they're suggesting that may be the case. And I'd like to refute both of those, Piers.
Do you think she's capable of violence against you? Is that what worries you?
Well, that is what worries me, yes. I don't know what...
Abusers love defending other abusers, and then what do they use? Abusive tactics.
So I don't know what she is capable of. But if somebody threatens to kill you on several occasions, just because they may have personality disorders, doesn't mean that they won't actually try and do it.
You think she might, or is capable of that?
Well, I seem to have been her major obsession over all these years.
You know what Fiona would say to that? I'm not obsessed with her. She's obsessed with me.
Depending on how you looked at things, that she maybe sees me as some sort of enemy and that maybe feels compelled to do something to harm me further.
Do you have a message for her if she's watching this?
Well, I think my message would be, I think you need to get some help. I think you need to get psychiatric help as soon as possible.
Yep.
And I think you need to get off Facebook and stop sending emails and so on to people because, you know, you're doing yourself no favours if you are going to sue Netflix.
Now, this is interesting. I do not think that Fiona Harvey has the energy at her old age to harass Richard Gadd, Laura, and go to war with Netflix. I think she's going to break down because people like this, they focus on one person and they're in complete control. They dominate them with fear and it's fun for them. I do not think that battling these three people is going to be fun for Fiona. I think she picked a battle that's a little too big for her. I think she's going to get exhausted. I think she's going to burn out. And I want to watch it. I can't wait to see. Hopeful. Very hopeful.